आदरणीय दर्शकवृन्द नमस्कार। आरम्भको आजको श्रृङ्खलामा यहाँहरु सबैलाई स्वागत छ। दर्शकवृन्द आजको हाम्रो अतिथि हुनुहुन्छ शेरा चेज। शेरा चेज थीव्स अफ स्टेट वाइ करप्सन थ्रेटन्स ग्लोबल सेक्युरिटी र द पनिशमेन्ट अफ भर्च्यु इनसाइड अफगानिस्तान आफ्टर तालिबान भन्ने पुस्तकहरूको अथर हुनुहुन्छ। 1996 देखि 2001 सम्म शेराले नेशनल पब्लिक रेडियोको निम्ति प्यारिस संवाददाता भएर काम गरिसक्नु भएको छ। सो गर्ने क्रममा कोसोभो क्राइसिस रिपोर्टिङका लागि उहाँलाई 1979 को फरेन प्रेस क्लब र सिग्मा डेल्टा ची पुरस्कारहरूबाट सम्मानित गरिएको थियो। भ्रष्टाचार र यसका दुष्परिणामहरूको बारेमा नवीन सोचको निम्ति विश्वविख्यात शेरा चेज हाल संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिकाको थिङ्क ट्याङ्क कार्नेगी इन्डाउमेन्ट फर इन्टरनेसनल पीसमा डेमोक्रेसी एन्ड रुल अफ ल प्रोग्राम अन्तर्गत सिनियर फेलोको रूपमा कार्यरत हुनुहुन्छ। यो बाहेक शेराले लस एन्जलस टाइम्स, वाशिङटन पोस्ट, न्युयोर्क टाइम्स, द फरेन पोलिसी र एटलान्टिकहरू जस्ता अखबारहरूको निम्ति लेख लेख्दै आउनुभएको छ। शेराको विश्वविख्यात पुस्तक जुन छ थीव्स अफ स्टेट भन्ने वाइ करप्सन थ्रेटन्स ग्लोबल सेक्युरिटीलाई 2016 को लस एन्जलस टाइम्स बुक प्राइजबाट सम्मानित गरिएको थियो। राजनीतिक शास्त्री एनी मैरी स्लटरले यस पुस्तकलाई एक क्रान्तिकारी पुस्तक भन्नुभएको छ भने अमेरिकन लेखक, पत्रकार तथा फिल्म मेकर सेबास्टियन जङ्गरले हाम्रो समयको निम्ति यो भन्दा महत्त्वपूर्ण अर्को पुस्तक सोच्न सकिन्न भनेर भन्नुभएको छ। यो पुस्तकमा शेराले चाहे इराक या सिरियामा पड्केका बम हुन् या युक्रेनको समस्या नै किन नहोस्, चाहे उत्तरी नाइजेरियामा अपहरणमा परेकी बालिका नै किन नहुन्, यी सबै विश्वव्यापी घटनाक्रमहरूलाई एक चीजले जोड्छ र त्यो हो भ्रष्टाचार भन्ने दलिल पेश गर्नुभएको छ। उहाँको निचोड छ भ्रष्टाचारको सामना गरिनुपर्छ, किनभने भ्रष्टाचारका कारणले गर्दाखेरि संसारमा अस्तव्यस्तता निम्त्याइएको स्थिति हो। आजको अस्तव्यस्तताको कारणले भ्रष्टाचार मौलाएको होइन कि भ्रष्टाचारका कारणले संसार अस्तव्यस्त छ भन्ने उहाँको दलिल छ। आजको हाम्रो कार्यक्रममा शेरा चेजको यही पुस्तक थीव्स अफ स्टेट र उहाँको पत्रकारितादेखि लेखकसम्मको जीवन यात्राको बारेमा हामीले चर्चा गर्नेछौँ। आउनुहोस् उहाँलाई कार्यक्रममा स्वागत गरौँ। शेरा, वेलकम टु द शो।
Thank you so much. What an honor.
And thank you very much for agreeing to talk with us for our program. Sarah, may I start by asking you, as I'm also a journalist, you started your career as a journalist but decided to quit it. What made you quit your...
It was a feeling that I was making my living on other people's drama without really having to take any responsibility for how the stories came out.
Right.
You know? You move on to the next drama. And particularly at the moment of, after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, I have a background in Islamic history, and it felt to me that you had two civilizations that are on this planet. Neither of them is going away, the Muslim civilization and the Western, if you will, civilization. And we both have so much to learn from and to teach each other. I felt, is this a moment when these two civilizations would figure out how to do that? It was felt to me like it was one of those moments where history could move in a different direction. Now, looking back, I'm afraid that it didn't work out that way. But at the time, it felt like a moment of out of crisis comes opportunity.
Right.
And it was important for me to do whatever I could to help it go in a direction that I felt was more constructive.
So you were more guided by a thought that you might contribute to these two civilizations getting to know each other.
Yes. It wasn't a question of sort of girl reporter falls in love with, you know, exotic Afghanistan, which a lot of people say. It wasn't specific like that. It was, I love Afghanistan, it's not that. But the point is, I felt like, you know, an earthquake, we talk about plate tectonics. I felt like the plate tectonics of history were moving. And I wanted to be where that was happening. Not, you know, just going. So it was a combination of let me put my money where my mouth is, if you will, and let me do that in a place that matters.
You talk about these thieves on your book, Thieves of State. Who are these thieves you are talking about?
These thieves of state, they're not, I come from a country where 4 million people are in jail. And we call them thieves or murderers or whatever. And they've stolen something, or they've sold some drugs, or they've killed someone. Then we have people who steal, millions and billions of dollars, but we don't put them in jail, we put them in high office, Right. The thieves of state that I'm talking about are the people who are running the political economies of so many countries in the world. And by that I mean they may be in top political office, they may be in top business positions, but are very closely connected to the people in top political office. And sometimes they're very senior criminals, but who are also connected with the people in business and the people in government. That's who I mean. I mean the leaders of what you could call networks. Almost criminalized networks. Right. But we can talk about that a little bit more as we go along.
Right. So now, since you have already labeled them thieves, do we need to be worried about them?
We need to be very worried about them.
Right.
For a couple of reasons. I mean, we need to be worried in the very basic physical security level. If you look, for example, you raised the question about journalists.
Right.
Look at which journalists have been assassinated recently. Almost all of them are ones who have been investigating corruption. You're not this is, the thieves of state are very protective of their revenue streams that they are capturing, and anyone who wants to limit them in any way, be that journalists, be it, look at the judges or prosecutors who have been assassinated. It used to be if you were investigating the mafia, you would get killed. Now, if you're investigating political corruption, you get killed. And so on that level, they're dangerous. But I also think they're dangerous because they are eroding the very foundations of government on behalf of the people, government by and for the people.
Right.
And so while they may not be, even sometimes when they're not posing a physical threat to people, they're posing a very significant moral and political threat to our societies.
Right. And this is the case in most of the countries right now. This networks of people who are.
Yes. So I have sort of roughly developed a list of between 60 and 70 countries around the world where corruption is seen to be systematic or systemic or very widespread. In almost every one of those countries, essentially, I think these networks of thieves of state are in fact running the countries. Right. But not just in countries like that. Like, it becomes convenient for people in a place like the United States or the United Kingdom or France to point the finger at, oh, India is corrupt, oh, Nepal is corrupt, oh, Nigeria is corrupt, oh, Azerbaijan is corrupt, Senegal, point the finger at third world countries without investigating or examining, number one, what is the role of Western countries in enabling, facilitating, and profiting from the corruption of third world countries, one.
Right.
And two, what is the nature of corruption in our own countries?
Absolutely, yeah. So before getting into those two important questions, may I request you to synthesize what this book is all about?
It's funny you put it that way, and I answer you so quickly because as we were speaking before we even came on this platform here, I said, oh, I've just synthesized 10 years of thinking into one sentence.
Absolutely.
So let me give you that book in one sentence. People subjected to systemic corruption react by going to extremes.
Could you please elaborate on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
So what's so funny is that's such a simple statement, and yet I found that officials and U.S. government officials could not understand that very simple proposition, that when you subject populations to systemic corruption, they will explode. And they explode in a variety of places. So I came to that sentence in this book through about 10 years of work in Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, what was everyone worried about? The Taliban, religious extremism, right? And what was it about, the interpretation of Islam that existed in Afghanistan that caused people to turn to the Taliban? And what I came to realize, I was living and working in Kandahar, which was the heartland of the Taliban, but the people of Kandahar hated the Taliban. They had lived through Taliban rule. They never wanted to see another Taliban in government as long as they lived, when I got there in 2002. By 2005 or 6, the people of Kandahar were so angry at the corruption of their government and at the role of the international community, particularly the United States, in supporting that government, that they were turning back to the Taliban. Let me tell you a story, and it's the story that I begin the book with. I founded a factory to make skincare products, beautiful soaps and lotion out of the agriculture that is produced in southern Afghanistan, the fruits and the nuts and the seeds. One of my members of my cooperative was a former police officer, actually, and he came to me one day absolutely furious because his brother had been driving back from the border with auto parts because he had a small shop, and he was being shaken down by the police at every single, every few kilometers he had to pay the police a bribe. And at some point he refused to pay the bribe. He got smacked in the face. And my colleague was so furious that he said, by God, if tomorrow I see a Talib laying a bomb in the road, by God, and I see a police vehicle driving down the road, I'm going to turn my back and I won't warn them. So I'm saying, oh my God, here's a former police officer telling an American that he's going to collaborate with collaborate with the Taliban. So here's the story. Here's the point of this. In Kandahar in 2008 or 2009, if you're a young man like the cameramen and soundmen we have working with us here, if you're a man of that generation, you have to work pretty hard not to join the Taliban. If you become so angry at the police, what do you want to do to the police? You want to shoot the guy, right? And you've got the Taliban right next door ready to help you.
To provide that space.
To provide the opportunity, right? But they also provide the argument. So it's not just that they put a gun in your hand and say, go ahead and shoot the cop. They also say the reason the police officer is so corrupt. And there, think about the kind of ambiguity of the word corruption. It means, on the one hand, it means something very material about stealing money from the people, but it also has moral overtones about, And so they say the reason the police officer is so corrupt is because he doesn't fear God. And if only we had a government that was organized according to God's law, then it couldn't be so corrupt. Well, of course, that's not true. Just look at Iran, and you see a theocracy that's one of the most corrupt governments in the world. But when you're a young, angry man in southern Afghanistan or in northern Nigeria, you're not doing comparative political analysis, right? You're not even remembering your own experience under the Taliban. Oh, no, their experience was that the Taliban were less corrupt, in fact, than this government. But you're not looking across the border at Iran. The argument is very persuasive. And what I do in Thieves of State also is show that it's not just Islam. And we'll maybe come back to this, but Western democracy also has its roots in a puritanical religious insurrection against corruption.
Yes, that's I guess, I was, as we proceed further, I was thinking to ask you, but now since you have brought this issue, you have drawn this parallel between the rise of Puritans against kleptocracy with that of religious extremism.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the same thing. The Puritans were an extremist, puritanical religious sect that rose up. I mean, that's what I found. They were central to the development of modern democracy in Northern Europe and in what became the United States. It turns out, as you look at who were the people that started inventing modern democracy, there are all these Puritans. So then I said, I didn't know anything about that history. So I went back and I actually started reading the foundational texts of that religious movement, which resembled today's extremist Islam in a lot of ways. They wore black, they were very focused on personal morality, and this very rigid, I want to say, ascetic, type of morality. It was a morality, you couldn't have fun, you couldn't drink, you couldn't, dance, you couldn't, quite similar to this very rigid type of Islam. And part of their argument was that public integrity starts with personal morality.
Right.
But as I looked at the foundational documents of these early religious extremists, Christian religious extremists, I found that almost all of those documents were talking about corruption, about public corruption. And so I found a very similar parallel of religious extremism as a reaction against government corruption, both in early Christianity or early modern Christianity and in Islam.
That's very interesting, isn't it? But now let's think, what does it mean for democracy then? The system that we are living in right now, this networks of corruption, how does it hampers the very growth of democratic exercises?
Let me start answering your question by touching on what you just said, these networks of corruption.
Right.
I think that too often when people use the word corruption in the material sense, they limit it to somebody taking bribes. Someone with an envelope taking bribes, or one individual government official who might be stealing part of the procurement, he might be getting kickbacks on a procurement contract. We think of it, like as bad apples.
Right.
You know what I mean? That when you have a bad piece of fruit, an individual bad piece of fruit. What I discovered in Afghanistan, and I've been, researching it for years now, is that this is not the behavior of random individuals. In fact, what we're looking at is networks. And what I mean by that is people who are connected. First of all, they are integrated vertically. What we discovered in Afghanistan is that even a pretty unimportant police official that honest Afghan police, supported by international police, had made a case against a border police official, medium level, not very important, but, they had a good case against him with, wiretaps and bank records and everything. And President Karzai started getting in the way. It was amazing to watch for one single police officer, and he starts, really in a lot of detail trying to prevent this case from going forward. And I'm like, why is the president of the country himself getting involved in the case of this quite unimportant police official? And that's when I understood how important this vertical integration is. Because if the president doesn't provide the protection, then the money will stop going up. So that's the vertical side. The horizontal side is what I said before, that I think that we like to categorize people. There's good guys and bad guys, right? The bad guys are the insurgents and the criminals. And the good guys are businessmen and government officials, basically, right? And then we'll even make a separation between private sector and public sector. Now, I know that's a more recent separation in Nepal than it is in the United States, but still there's a sense that a businessman is a different type of person than a government official. In these networks, not so much. So, for example, one example is the president of Azerbaijan. First of all, he appointed his wife to be his vice president, right? And then their children own 11 banks. You see, and so you have an overlap between the public sector and the private sector. I come from the United States of America, right? The president's son-in-law is a White House official, but also runs a family business. So we're starting to see this same overlap between public and private, even in the United States. And then you also get the criminal networks are very often woven right in. So in Afghanistan, for example, the president's brother was both a businessman, but he also was in charge of part of the opium traffic. So he was a criminal, a businessman, and a public official all at the same time. He's dead now. He got shot, not surprisingly, right? You know, the guy got assassinated. But because you actually had one person who was a node in this network. So your question was, how do these networks threaten democracy? Here's how they do it, because each, and I would say they represent perhaps the biggest threat to democracy of our generation. In a previous generation, you know, Nazism was the biggest threat to, you know, autocracy might have been the biggest threat to democracy. I think today, kleptocracy is the biggest threat to democracy. And here's how. Because in an integrated network like that, you have division of labor. People do what they're best at. So like the criminal strand of the network, what are they good at doing? They're good at logistics, right? They're good at moving contraband across borders. So that's the role that they play. They're also good at killing people. So they can serve as the muscle for the network. What the public officials are good at doing is bending the instruments of state power to serve the purposes of the network. Now, in a democracy, state power is supposed to serve what? The people. So what these guys do is they bend the government to do exactly the opposite of what a democracy is supposed to do, and to serve the powerful network. Why it's such a danger is because, you know, autocrats, that's obviously a threat to democracy, because you can see it. They have their jackboots and they've got their uniforms and they put people in jail and they repress people. And so it's an easy target. But kleptocrats dress in the clothes of democrats. And so they're a much more dangerous threat because they're less easy to see.
So since you have used this term kleptocracy, would you mind simplifying what it means?
What it means is government by the type of network that I just described. Government whose objective is to enrich, a government whose objective is to steal from the people. That's the word klept. You know, let me say this again. Ocracy is the part of the word that sort of means government. Klepto is the part of the word that means steal. So what it means is a government whose objective is to steal. It's not just that it does steal. It's that its whole objective is to, it bends government itself to the process of stealing instead of the process of governing. And so in fact, what I found is that these governments are not in fact governments. They're vertically and horizontally integrated criminal organizations that are masquerading as governments. So that's what I mean by kleptocracy.
So that brings me to another question, which perhaps links what you have just said with the kind of changes that took place in the Arab countries in 2011. What should we learn out of it?
Yeah. I think that we're in a period where kleptocracy is spreading around the world, you know. And so you take a country like Tunisia, for example, which was run by a dictator, but in the early years, he was still inspired by the idea that he should do something for his people. And so he actually did. I mean, he was an autocratic ruler, but if you look at the condition of public services in Tunisia, it's pretty good. You know, it really is pretty good. But gradually over the years, he and his family became more and more interested in stealing the wealth of the country for themselves. And so it got to the point where the Tunisians turned to extremes. Now, in their case, they didn't go to religious extremism, although they did afterwards, but they went to revolution. I mean, it's a pretty extreme thing to topple your ruler and kick him out, you know. But unfortunately, what I think we've now learned from those experiences in all of those countries, it's not enough to just overthrow one thief of state. They overthrew Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali, but they didn't overthrow the kleptocratic network. A network is a very resilient structure. And if need be, if it's under pressure, it will sometimes chop off a part of itself in order for the network itself to survive. Exactly. Absolutely. And that's what you've seen in Tunisia, in Egypt, and certainly in Syria. In Syria, the network never even was toppled. But it's a really important, I think, you know, again, I've mentioned the United States a number of times, but some people in America are concerned that the United States is sliding in this direction. And as you know, President Trump was not very popular. The election of President Trump was not popular. A lot of people are quite angry about it. And so among some people, there's, you know, we have to impeach. And I keep saying, be careful, because you can lose just Trump. But it's not just Trump. He's put a whole network in power now. And we have to be careful not to put all of our focus on the guy at the top. You need to think much more carefully and strategically about how do you actually dismantle a network like this.
So before asking question in relation to that, as in how to overcome with this whole systems and networks, I was wondering if we could also discuss something about the way individuals in modern society today have started valuing economy and money more, if you compare that with the ideals.
I'm so glad you asked this question. It's such a beautiful question. I actually spent a week and a half in Nigeria asking people, has the meaning of money, I don't mean the value, I mean the meaning, the social significance of money, has it changed in your lifetime? Oh my God, people exploded. And I would love to spend a week and a half in Nepal asking the same question, because I learned so much. And I think this is part of what has shaped these developments that we've been discussing up until now, is I believe that we're living in one of the periods of history, and it comes and goes, you know, but we're living in a moment right now where money has displaced other values in how somebody gains social stature and standing and respect from his community and his peers.
Absolutely,
in the past, somebody could be quite poor, but have great respect and be revered. Why? Because of their wisdom, because of their integrity, because of their ability to think on behalf of the community. You know, there might be a lot of it because of how effective a teacher they are in conveying knowledge to the next generation, or what a talented artist they are, that they can make such beautiful things that even if they don't sell for much money, they're revered by society. The range of things for which we give people respect, down to just about only money. And that's created a lot of dynamics, because then money is the representation of other types of value like resources.
Absolutely.
So money becomes the way that we value each other socially. It means there's no such thing as enough.
Exactly. Yeah.
If money is just a means for me to subsist, then when I have a warm and comfortable house, when I have enough money to educate my children, and when I have enough vegetables and different things to eat,
right,
then I have sufficient money. I'm happy. If I have clothes that are both beautiful and keep me warm, that's all I need. When money is the way that you and I compete, there's no such thing as enough. You have 1 million rupees. I need 3 million rupees.
Absolutely.
You need, 500 million rupees. And we go on like that. And what that means is there is an infinite draw on natural resources. You get your money, for example, by building hydroelectric plants in Nepal. And what you hope is when everyone in Nepal has enough electricity, then you hope to be able to sell the electricity to India. So you're going to build more hydroelectric plants, and what happens? You destroy all of the rivers in Nepal, and suddenly this beautiful country no longer has any free-flowing rivers. And so the only way you can continue to compete in this race is by actually destroying the things of real value upon which both our society, our economy, but also our spirituality, and frankly, all of the other creatures on this earth rely. So that's one point. And I would actually like to go back now, having said that, and let's just touch on that democracy question again.
Okay.
Let's go back even before democracy. No matter what type of rule a country was under back in history, there was always supposed to be a sacred moment when an individual puts on the clothing of the ruler. And that was a sacred threshold that that person was supposed to cross and leave behind his or her personal ambitions, personal greed, personal, grabbing. You lay interest. You lay aside your personal interest at that moment when you cross the threshold, and you take on the interest of the people that you are supposed to serve. Well, one of the things that we discovered, one of the reasons we got modern democracies, we discovered that monarchs don't do that. They're supposed to. But they don't. They don't. They cease to have respect for that sacred rite of passage. So we said, okay, we have to make them. We have to make our rulers serve the public interest. The first way is we subject them to law. And so another thing I learned in studying the roots of democracy for Thieves of State is that the root of democracy is not in suffrage. It's not in voting and choosing the ruler. No, the earliest root of democracy is forcing the king to submit to law. And that was the most radical thing the English did back in the 17th century. They forced their king, they put their king on trial. And he understood how radical that proposition was. And he knew it was so radical he refused. He would rather be killed. He would rather lose his life than submit to a trial. So that's the first way that you constrain the ruler. The second way is through suffrage and choice by saying, and then if the ruler refuses to be subject to law, then we'll throw him out by electing a new one. So then you get elections. So those are, I think, the two pillars of democracy is the justice sector, the judges and the courts, and elections. The problem is kleptocratic networks capture both of these. That's the danger of kleptocratic
So in
networks.
that sense, the whole notion of democracy has been dismantled in today's context.
That's exactly right.
It just limited to the 5 years election that people go and vote one sort of government and replace the another.
And because they have captured both the legal structure and the lawmaking structure, so they choose which rules, and then they don't even subject themselves to the very rules that they chose because they've captured the courts. empties democracy of its content. And all we voters get to do is an empty gesture of writing somebody's name on a ballot, but we know that we're just exchanging different members of kleptocratic networks. We're not really addressing the system. And that's why so many people don't vote.
Right.
Because they know that it's an empty.
Right. Sarah, I would just like to pull you a little back and ask you in relation to the discussion that we had on ideals, money, ideals
versus
over
ideals.
money. Is this the system and the subsystem created in a way that people are forced to live in a way they're living today, valuing money more as compared to ideals?
No one is forced to do anything. We choose. Every individual chooses, and we make mistakes all the time. We laugh at this when we see it because we think we're superior. That's not good. A couple of examples. I went to visit the Emir of Kano, which is a town also in Nigeria, and he's a friend of mine. And that's, he's a traditional ruler of that part of the country. And I went to his palace, and I didn't know exactly where his audience chamber was. There was a police officer. So I asked him directions. And when I came out, he said, "We're hungry out here," meaning, right? Now, what did I do? I miss corruption. What did I do? I kind of laughed at him and I walked. And I said, that was a moment where I could have taught, instead of laughing and accepting this, respect of money, I could have stopped him and said, "Excuse me?" He couldn't put me in jail. He knew I'm a friend of the Emir. I was safe. So I could have said, "Excuse me? Did you just ask me for a bribe in the Emir's palace?" So I could have used my standing in that moment to start changing the social mores. And I forgot to do it. So what I'm saying is each of us needs to make a choice in every moment of our everyday life to choose ideals over money.
And
that doesn't mean become, poor or impoverished. It means re-establish the balance.
Sarah, thank you very much for your words. आदरणीय दर्शकवृन्द, आजको निम्ति यति नै। अर्को साता म पुनः अर्को अतिथि र अर्को विषयका साथ उपस्थित हुनेछु। म सुमित शर्मा समितलाई मेरो सम्पूर्ण युनिट सहित बिदा दिनुहोस्। नमस्कार।